So this next session is really to bring in some of our kind of international brothers and sisters. It's about our kind of clean energy achievements globally, and we're so delighted that both Brett Isaac and Freddie Campbell can join us. So both of these organisations, so Brett is from the Navajo Nation and the CEO and founder of Navajo Power, and Freddie is from Indigenous Clean Energy, and I'll do their bio in a second. But both of them have been really instrumental in modelling what's possible. Indigenous Clean Energy were part of our original roundtables actually, and gave us some really important advice about what it will actually take. And they said to us, making sure that industry and government work really closely together is really critical, but also making sure that you as a people are organised and able to actually lobby and advocate for what it is that we want to see in our country. So I'm really so delighted that both of these two can join us this morning. So first up, we do have Brett Isaac, who's a member of the Navajo Nation. He's worked with local chapters in the nation to execute numerous community development initiatives. He's collaborated with Navajo community of Shonto in the development of community enterprises and the creation of a solar company on the nation. So they're really doing some of this work at large scale. And he's the founder and CEO of Navajo Power. So let's welcome Brett.
Thank you for the invitation. Yate, my name is Brett Isaac. I am a member of the Navajo Nation, and very humbled and super appreciative to be talking to you all. I was going to start off with a bit of origin. I was born in a community that essentially was in the shadow of a power plant or a coal mine. We had energy around us at the time that we were taught was the basis for economic driver. And, I had my relatives and family all, working at this place. But what we soon come to realize is the fossil fuel industry really didn't have our backs in the sense that, their existence was going to be limited. And for me, what that started was this conversation when I became, at a certain position to say, what is it that's driving the economies of our communities? And really what I felt was a bit of absence of Indigenous presence. So what I felt was at the highest levels of companies, at the highest levels of government and leadership, it wasn't our own, families and our own people representing us. It was outsiders who were, I would say, hell-bent on protecting their interests, but not ours. And so I really kind of started to study this idea around how we can get to those positions. Because initially, before, I had this kind of thought around energy, I was looking at, what I would call provisions of control, which is what allows us to build the road we want to build or build a building the way we want to build. A lot of our funding comes tied to this idea that there's a funding entity that has its own ideas. And that always felt disconnected for me. And I wanted to get to a place where we weren't limited by those factors. I wanted to get to a position where we could build things that were decided by us, for us, and they serve our communities. And really, that's what Navajo Power was kind of born of. Initially, I wanted to start a bank, because one of the biggest issues was other people were financing our dreams, and they didn't have the same dream we did. So I wanted to find ways that we could build products and things. 10 years ago, I started my first energy company, which was off-grid. We have thousands of families and homes in our community on the Navajo Nation that don't even have access to energy. They're using generators, whether it be diesel or gas. They're using kerosene lamps. They're, doing all the things by their own kind of science. And so that's where I feel I needed to kind of infuse myself. And so I created a company that essentially created small power plants, put them in the yards of the families. And we had an ability to provide a solution, to the people, where there was a battery and solar and, very basic. And what it taught me was that the renewable energy industry, solar in particular, has a very low barrier to entry. We don't have to build a supermassive power plant to start. We can start with one home, one light, one solar panel, one battery. Like, it doesn't have to be super complex, but that initial scale is then scalable to powering hundreds of thousands of homes. And where the benefit happens at that level, which is what Navajo Power was created to do. Navajo Power is a public benefit corporation that develops large scale clean energy projects, and its mission is to maximize community benefits. Success is envisioned with the community as we're building, not post or not pre. We don't try to do something where it's like, well, you're getting X and X dollars per acre a year and you should be happy. It's no, what do you want to see change in your community? Because when coal left my community, there wasn't a good feeling because success wasn't achieved. Yes, there were jobs. Yes, there was income. Yes, there was a lot of good things. And the workers themselves were really, created to serve and build this corporation up. But then the corporation vanished. And now you had miners who their entire lives knew how to operate a mine or knew how to operate a power plant, but now had no mine or power plant to operate. And there wasn't a way for them to go to the next thing. So what we're looking at with Navajo Power is essentially creating dynamic economies where we can make people understand what we're trying to do, but also make people into the versions of, I guess, employees that create value. Where it's like you may know a bit about electrical, you may know all these other things, but we want to constantly create landing pads for you. When I was a kid, they taught us that we should go seek education, come back home and serve our community. There wasn't a job for me when I got home. There isn't a job right now for engineers, for lawyers, for doctors, for all the things we aspire to go out and learn about. Someone needs to create that, and that's what I kind of felt responsibility for. And so in this time, like, that's what we're doing. Although we're brand new, we've been incorporated since 2018, we've gained tremendous traction, not only because of the work we can do. Anybody can put solar panels on the ground. The hard part is making those solar panels work for you beyond just collecting the sun, because they can bring revenues, they can bring opportunity, they can bring hope back to your communities if you're willing to leverage and do that part right. So, I'm very proud of what we're doing, and I know it's a short amount of time to present, but that's kind of what we are talking about in terms of what this industry can do for Indigenous communities. It's essentially a tool, and there are no better tool makers and toolsmiths than Indigenous communities when it comes to finding something and squeezing every practical use out of it. And so for us, when we go to these communities, there's a bit of consultation, not only around like the project itself, but what success looks like. Is it jobs? Is it capacity creation? Is it autonomy? Because just like I wanted to get away from funding situations where I wasn't in control, communities need income if they're going to have an ability to invest in their future. Otherwise, whatever support is coming is dictated by somebody else. And that, to me, doesn't service the needs of people. What it does is keep them tethered to an existence of perpetual, reliance. And I want us more and more to get away from that. So whatever community we work with, that's the promise is, I want to make sure that at the end of this, success was a vision we had. And, as developers, we're kind of like prophets because we come in with no idea of how to do anything until we know what is on the ground. And we speak of it like it's some sort of scripture. and then we put it into action and we make it exist. So as developers of energy projects, that's what we have to be, is in shepherds of what is coming from our own envisioning, technical capabilities, and like a really good, um, technical accuracy, predict what's going to happen in the future. Because that is what hope is built off of. When something is promised and delivered, then the next thing becomes a little easier. And although we're building solar projects, and I'm very happy that we're gaining success in the US, we have over 1.5 gigawatts currently under development. We're going to get 3 gigawatts by 2030. I'm happy about all those things. I'm more excited about what comes next once people have hope restored back in them, and once we can actually move with our own financial freedom and our own ability to call our shots and where we're going. So with that, I encourage, there's going to be a lot of, I've already experienced it. There's a lot of dark paths, even in our own communities. The hardest thing to do is work where you're from, because they're the most critical of you. And I don't think they're critical from a bad, negative perspective. I think they're critical because they want the best from something. But I think that's what we see when we're talking about development is, why things don't happen in a lot of our communities is it gets so tough and so hard that they kind of lose hope in what happens next. And we get so close to the top of the hill and then we roll back down, and I've assembled a team and I've assembled a kind of an initiative and a mission that let's just keep moving, let's get there. And again, this first success will be just something we mark. But the second, the third, the fourth, all the things we do beyond this will be because we decided that we wouldn't accept anything less. So I appreciate your time, and I'm sure I'll have plenty of questions. So I appreciate it, Kiet. From my land to yours, I'm reaching out and just letting you know, like, there's allies out here that, you can bounce things off of and reach out to. So I'm very appreciative of the invite to support, and wish I could have been there in person. But hopefully you guys keep this going and I'll be there next year. So okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Brett. And I think that idea of starting simply and small and not accepting anything less is really useful for us. Hope you can stay with us because we will try and make some time at the end for a couple of questions. So I would like to introduce Freddie Campbell next. She's a Métis woman from the traditional territory of the Kanaka Nation, and she currently resides in the traditional territory of the Longan Anishinaabe Nation. She's the Program Manager for the Three Island Energy Initiative and Indigenous Clean Energy's Global Hub, focusing on accelerating clean energy and microgrids in Indigenous island and coastal and unconnected communities as a core component of their global climate action. She holds a Bachelor in Public Policy from the University of Mary and also a Master's in Conflict Prevention and Peace Building from Durham University in the UK. It's so great to have Freddie with us, who's been with us from the start of this journey. So please put your hands together for Freddie. Thanks.
Merci, Karina. Tanshe, Kiowau, Freddie P. Campbell, Dishnika Shon, Kutne Ochitia Maka, Nimama Lian Hupi, Shinika Sho, Ni Papa Peter Campbell, Shinika Sho, Niagishte Teiman, Alamachif A1, Kakiawa Maparanti. Hello, everyone. My name is Freddie P. Campbell. I was born in the Kootenay region in what is known as Canada. My mother's name is Leanne Hupi, and my father's is Peter Campbell. I'm proud to be a Michif person and very grateful to be here with all my relations today on the other side of the world. So Marcy for having me, thank you. Oral storytelling is very important to my culture. And so today I would like to share with you a part of the Indigenous clean energy story. Everything started within community. So in the country known as Canada, we have thousands of Indigenous communities dispersed across these lands, and many of them in remote or semi-remote areas. Now, based on how colonization impacted our communities and our electricity systems, and frankly, all of our systems that govern our country today, many communities don't have access to reliable or affordable energy, such as what Brett was saying as well, similar to our relations down south. So many communities have been taken advantage of, and lands and resources are used by our electricity utilities and then sold back to our nations for more money. So this is pretty wrong and still goes on in a lot of areas today. And so Indigenous clean energy started with this idea that what if things could be different? What if we took training and capacity building to the communities and took a community-led approach to renewable energy education? And from there, we could build up this network of experts in Indigenous community clean energy, and we would have kind of this system and this team of people across the country to take forward clean energy projects. Now, the goal with starting with capacity building was because many communities face a lot of barriers to education systems here, to financing systems, and we thought if there was something that we could bring folks together from all across nations, that it would be much more impactful in the end. And it did work. It's been about 6 years since Indigenous Clean Energy started our flagship program, where we took 20 different community members from across the country and brought them together to do just that. And in the past 12 years within this country, there are over 1,000 small to large scale renewable energy projects that have over 50% equity ownership by Indigenous communities. And I say that equity piece because it's really important. That was one area that we have advocated for quite strongly and still do within our utilities and within our government mechanisms, because without equity, then communities would just be taken advantage of again with these types of projects. So that's a really key piece. One example of a pretty amazing story of communities, there are 3 nations in Listigouche, which is known as Quebec in this country, that all share quite a large space of land, and they decided to build a 150 megawatt wind farm. And so that project, it took a long time and a lot of hard work. It took about 8 years to get that project underway, but they are well above the investment that they made and have quite a lot of economic return for their communities. Their communities came together and built camaraderie. There were jobs created. There were gender equity opportunities, cultural revitalization for the community. And similar to what Brett said, just that feeling of empowerment and that opportunity for sovereignty within the community to do what they wanted with their energy, with their power, and with all the funds that came from it. So that was one example. As I mentioned, there are now thousands and growing. And just recently, I was fortunate enough to be up in Iqaluit, Nunavut in the north. So it's pretty far north here in a remote area. And we got to speak to someone who was at our first Catalyst program, and they envisioned making a microgrid energy efficient solar panel hotel. And our cohort this year got to do our skill building program in that hotel. So that was pretty cool. And we have hundreds of Indigenous clean energy experts now in the network. And as Karina mentioned, that's why we've been working more globally, because we think that this model is adaptable. Any communities can do it. It does take hard work, but there's lots of incredible work that's gone on around the world in different areas. And yeah, anything is possible, I think, when there's a strong group of people willing to work together. So it's been a really beautiful journey and it's still ongoing, and just so grateful to be speaking with you all today. And yeah, as Brett said too, I look forward to hopefully meeting folks in person and maybe doing some of that global mentorship, because I think it's time that Indigenous communities are at the forefront of these conversations, because we hold centuries of knowledge and wisdom. So Marcy, thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Freddie. Constantly been an inspiration, the work that you guys have been doing over there for us. So we do have time. We'll take 2 questions. And if you don't have one ready, I do. But I'm sure that you do, right? Okay, while you're thinking about it, we'd love to hear if both of you have one piece of advice that you would give to First Nations here. Do you want to start?
I'll go
Right,
first. One developer told me your projects will die 1,000 times before they succeed. The idea of failure is different when it comes to these kind of projects. Is they look dire more often than they look successful. And so that, was very important to me because we're so used to things being linear and such a structure. When we hear no, we're thinking, well, I guess that's the end of the road. That's not always the case with these types of projects. What it means is maybe the timing is not right, maybe the funding cycle isn't right, maybe the window of opportunity just started to open. But having hope and continuing with the opportunity and being like steadfast and knowing that you should get something from this. You got to have an attitude of it's not a matter of if, it's more of a matter of when. That's what you have to have being an energy person.
Yeah, that was really beautiful, Brett. I completely agree. I think that, not knowing or knowing that you're not alone in this. I think we've connected with over 50 different countries, Indigenous communities, remote islanded communities who are doing this type of work. And it's definitely hard work, like Brett said, but it is very worth it in the end. And we have a strong network of strong Indigenous leaders across the nations, from youth to elders. And there's so much opportunity when we come together. So yeah, reach out, use your resources, and yeah, keep that hope alive for sure.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
I'm just interested to hear what was the source of the funding to get the projects off the ground? What was the funding mechanisms that you've been able to tap?
Yeah, sure. Brett, you can go. I'll go after.
So my earlier companies, I always felt like Rambo, like fighting one source at a time all by myself, fighting the entire world going up. Fortunately, with Navajo Power, we got to be able to understand financial mechanisms and strategies a little more. We created an impact investment syndicate that brought together like-minded foundations, groups that had, climate and Indigenous rights impact initiatives, and we syndicated them. We raised about 10 million US to our initial seed round. We will be raising about another 10 million for a Series A because we're a company. And then I have ambitions of raising $100 million development fund because we now understand that the world that was not available to us in the past, this can be the Wall Streets of the US or, those typical finance mechanisms, they're starting to open their eye towards us, but we got to be a little cautious with them. One of the things that we've done, and our syndicate is an example of this, when we raise capital from those markets, we made them commit to a level of community return. So we have one provision. This is one of a lot of them, but one of them is like we made them select a lower interest rate to traditional debt. So we priced that at 12%. And we said, you can select 1 to 3, but Navajo Power will be on the hook for 12. The difference you select, we're going to put into what we call the Mission Delta Fund. And that fund will go into providing energy access, funding, water access. So we use a traditional mechanism, but we made them commit to levels, and I'll say we made them, but they also were willing because they wanted to see recycled capital. And the debt funds, as well as the equity funds in the US, are really, really well positioned, but they just need to be led down the idea of where it aligns with benefits back to Indigenous communities. That's what we got to create. And that's what we did on Navajo Power side. Curious to see what Freddie's done.
Yeah, we have, like I mentioned, there are thousands of different projects. So it is really dependent on the community, but I think a lot of successes came from a blended finance model. So utilizing some government funds, there are some really great programs that have been established over the past 10 years, like Indigenous off diesel initiative. So it's like quite a large fund that has been committed to remote Indigenous communities to reduce GHGs and diesel consumption. And then that mixed with private and some public funds has been really successful for communities. And then, as I mentioned before, within all of the agreements or the majority of agreements within these projects are at least minimum 50, usually 51% equity ownership for communities. So yeah, taking that blended finance role has reduced a lot of the risk because these projects can cost quite a bit of money.
Thank you. We could take one more.
Thank you, Brett and Freddie. Good, but I took your position, Isaac, around perpetual alliance, as we as Aboriginals in Australia has been forced in that position, which then it created soap operas. Negative, positive, and then I go to you, Freddie, great model and all that. How did you go about changing attitudes? One, within our own communities, the Aboriginal and Indigenous stuff, this is the way we got to go, and then with all of those stakeholders, be it private sectors, government tiers, that attitude, because it goes back to you, Isaac, the expectations from the non-Aboriginal world, be it government, be it the private sectors in this shift towards cleaner energy and that engagement and empowerment of Aboriginal people are attitudes. And that's what we've got to do a lot of work on, is attitude. So, you know, that's what I've taken from both is, you know, what was that work, that hard work in changing that mindset around attitudes so that we will be that equitable force that allows us to grow that capacity. Thank you.
I can start. Thanks, Brad. I think that's a really, really great question. From our end, let's start with the community. I think as more and more projects started to happen and news spread, you know, news spreads pretty quick in Indigenous communities. And I think that we just kind of started this rolling ball, this snowball that just grew and grew, and more communities heard about this work and what the opportunities were for clean energy, and that it was time now for colonization not to occur again with the clean energy transition, and communities have the right to their own energy and to their own lands and resources that they've been protecting for years. So I think it just started to grow, and we do have a ton of intergenerational trauma and mental health, and that is ongoing, and those issues don't go aside. But these types of projects can integrate some of those things, and I think communities have started to really bridge and band together and heal in a lot of ways, and that's what we hear from a lot of our projects, is that healing. And then from there, I think on the policy and the government and the utilities and the private sector, again, I think a lot of folks here advocated and asserted the rights of communities, that we need to have free, prior, and informed consent within our countries. We need to have access to our lands and our resources, and that there's a lot of reconciliation, I put in air quotes because that term gets tossed around a lot by governments, but there is so much work that has to be done, and so much to be given back. So we kind of leveraged those pieces and said that now is the opportunity to do things right. And you can't have climate action be successful without Indigenous communities, or we have no chance. So I think those pieces were what we did use for leverage. And also a lot of our communities do use a lot of diesel just based on the facts that I mentioned before. So GHG reductions for governments was a big one. Impact on health is so connected to energy. That was really big. Gender equity. There were a lot of things that fit our government mandates, and we've just kind of adapted depending on who is in power and use that to advocate. I'm sure Brett has a lot more too.
Well, first I want to like predicate is like I think I'm a strategist from the beginning. And what I always say to like, people from home is like, when have we ever been in charge? When have you seen us, our skin, our hair, our people in the C-suite of the companies that have been, dictating our lives? It's never happened. But now we have a chance to do it. Now we have that ability to carry that ball. And it's important for me, I have a daughter who's just about to go into college. And, her whole life, she hasn't known her dad to be anything other than an entrepreneur. But, when have our own youth envisioned themselves in the positions to bring these things to our communities? It's just like envisioning them to be professional sports players, whether it be, down there, rugby or football or soccer, up here, hockey, all kinds of other things, in the basketball. Until we see ourselves in those places, it's very hard for us to envision what success looks like. But the part of that is the challenge on us today. Like today, we have to prove that. As individuals living in the moment now, we have to seek as much of the privilege that it takes to get to those positions, whether it be through education or through just sheer will and hard work, to get there and to prove that, like, look, we can build these things. I spent an entire 10 years building off-grid systems in places no one else would go. I flew to Alaska, I flew to Hawaii, I flew to North Dakota, I built it on Navajo Nation. I proved that you could build something with just very little than a backpack full of tools and some stubbornness, like that I wasn't going to be told I couldn't do it. And that's why people continue to have me speaking today is like, I don't think that we're limited, and I want to prove it to not only those that doubt us in our own communities, but those little hands and feet that are watching behind them, because those are the ones that are going to be the ones that do something meaningful for us. And if we can just get this above a certain level and give them just that bench that they can stand on, we're going to see so much more advancement quickly, because it wasn't afforded to us. We didn't have it. Our parents, our relatives, our grandparents were oppressed. They were coming down and still being challenged to the point where like now we finally have something to stand up on. So what I would encourage and kind of looking forward, even to those stakeholders, is run for office. Go after that position, challenge those executives, go after the advancement, try to get that job, get that education, get that doctorate, because we need everybody in all the positions if we really are going to make a meaningful shot at this. And when we are in control, that's the only way we can ensure that our vision is carried out. And I'm trying to do it in the business world. I know a lot of you are doing it in all kinds of other spaces, but we also need to collaborate. And as I was telling Freddie, is like, we need to connect on this, because the collective brain tissue of what we're doing, across the world is only going to be meaningful if we stick together. The colonizers knew how to create fractions, and they broke our connections apart. And that's one of the reasons I committed to this, is I see tremendous potential in us regrowing those nerve systems back together, because the only way we're going to control going forward is we do it collaboratively. And then we invite our allies. I got some white in-laws that I want to bring along as well, but that's the piece that's missing too, is like, as being Indigenous, we aren't segregational. Like, we don't exclude allies or people because of what they are. We're inclusive. We've done it better. We've always done it that way. And being that way is going to be the way that we show something better. And I'm so proud of what people are doing to this point. And again, I can't wait to see what you guys are doing down there, but I'm also super proud of what we're doing up here. But it's in motion, it's movement. The only thing that keeps it moving is we keep talking, collaborating, and meeting together on a basis to keep showing each other that we moved it, even if it's an inch, we moved it a little bit, because that's what motivates each of us to keep going. So to those stakeholders, even the ones in our communities, they need to be shown success. They need to see that something is advancing. Otherwise, all they're going to see is just a tremendous mountain they got to climb, not the steps that we're building for them as we're going along the way. And it's up to us and you guys and everyone here to build those steps. So I encourage you to keep doing that. And I'm super, just motivated today. So thank you.
Thank you both so much for joining us this morning, for sharing your wisdom and your determination and paving the way, but also I think reminding us that we are not on this mission alone. So can everyone join us in just thanking these guys again for joining us this morning? Thank you so much. Okay, and I think it's time for a break, so we'll be back in here at 11. Thanks, everyone.